My purpose statement is I forge paths so that goodness prevails. I see my whole life experience through this statement.
Welcome to Toddle School Leaders Project. I'm your host, Cindy Blackburn, and on today's episode, I'm speaking with Ross Wehner. I met Ross when he was keynoting at a conference I was attending, and what really stood out to me is that he helps you to tell the story of your values and purpose. Now, this might seem kind of airy-fairy, but I think especially with enrollment numbers dropping, schools really need to know what their value statement is. So we talk all about the importance of storytelling, knowing your values, and really setting yourself apart as a school and a leader. You're not going to miss this episode, so let's jump right in. Ross, I'm so excited to have you here in the School Leaders Project. Thanks so much for joining me.
It's great to be here.
Will you set the stage by kind of telling our audience who are you and what's the work that you do that you're most passionate about?
Sure. Um, as we will explore later in this talk, but my purpose statement is I forge paths so that goodness prevails. And I see my whole life experience through this statement. As a child, I forged paths in the woods and I explored them with my brothers. Um, we had incredibly great times doing that. As a journalist in Latin America in the 1990s, my specialty was seeing stories and then sort of like building a market around those stories.
Mm.
And then now as a social entrepreneur, what I do is I see a good idea and then I build a team around it. And I've done that four times in the last 15 years successfully. And so I really see my whole life story through this idea of I forge paths so that goodness prevails. It helps me stay strong in the moment when things get challenging. And this purpose statement also helps me make decisions in the future about what I should do and what I should not do.
It's so beautiful. I love that by having that mission statement, you're able to see the through lines throughout your life because sometimes it feels like it's hard to kind of draw those parallels. And then when somebody else helps you make that connection, it's like, I never would have put that piece together. So, what a beautiful framework for kind of looking backwards and forwards.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. You know, I think that one of the things that's true is that people, I'm in my late 50s now, and looking back on my life, it makes a lot of sense. I can see very clear patterns. Um, and the work that I do is helping people, especially young people, achieve that clarity when they're young.
Yeah.
When they're in their teens or in their early 20s, to begin to see the beginning of that golden thread um, that runs through, I believe, everyone's life, so that they can navigate through uncertainty and follow a path of meaning that will be durable.
And is that kind of your venture at the moment is doing this work, this purpose and meaning and storytelling work in schools with students?
Yes, that's right. So I started after being a journalist for almost a decade. I got tired of constantly fighting and uh, and covering, just writing about difficult stories with human rights or climate change um, or just all kinds of cholera and epidemics that were happening at the time in Latin America in the 1990s. And I started this organization called World Leadership School, and our mission is to partner with K-12 schools to reimagine learning and create next generation leaders.
Cool.
So our goal as an organization is to help K through 12 school become a launchpad for purpose. We believe that purpose is the design principle for school in the future. And we ask the question, what if the purpose of school were purpose? Like, what if we
Mm.
design school specifically to help children thrive? So in our work at World Leadership School, we do a lot of things, but all around this mission of helping school become a launchpad for purpose. So we help schools take students out into the world on immersive partnership-based travel experiences in 12 countries and 3 locations in the United States. And we work with students and teachers and school leaders to bring global purposeful learning into school.
Mm.
And so, as part of that, I do work with teachers and students and heads of school around really dropping in and experiencing purpose for ourselves, because we feel that when we experience the magic and energy and power and emotion of stepping into our full humanity, we automatically can imagine that for other people, and we want
Mm.
other people to experience that as well. So that's like a very important first step in all of our work, is helping people connect with their humanity.
Well, and I was lucky enough to be kind of dropped into that experience. You were keynoting at a conference I was attending, and I was just riveted the entire time. So I'd love to kind of walk through my experience with you. Um,
Sure.
I think hopefully we can kind of give the audience a snippet of what that felt like and kind of that shared experience. So when we started together, you started like in the groove, getting yourself in the groove and grounding in joy. And why do you think it's so important that when we're talking about meaning, why is joy such a great starting point?
Yeah, well, I think that life should be joyful.
Yeah.
Not to say that life should also is also full of struggle and challenge and sometimes suffering. But we use groove moments to identify points in our life when we stepped into um, a moment that felt like we were in the groove. Moments where
Mm.
we are saying, "Yes, this is me. I love what I'm doing. Um, this is who I am." Right? Because it's in those moments that um, when we look at those moments and we study those moments, we can easily see a golden thread, or
Right.
we can begin to see a golden thread. And the other moment that we often ask people to think about and write stories about are these growth moments. These are growth moments. These are moments when we struggle, we overcome an obstacle, and we grow. Right. And in the groove moments, what we see present in those moments are the conditions that allow us to bring our greatest gifts. Um,
Mm.
and in the growth moments, often what we see is the opposite. These are moments where our gifts are like our values are shut down. Um, and so we use these stories as a way to help people connect with their golden thread.
Gorgeous. Yeah, I had such a fun time thinking about that. And it, are you familiar with Gay Hendricks' work? He kind of phrases this as your zone of genius.
Yes.
And the timing was so serendipitous because I just led a keynote on this concept of zone of genius, and that was kind of where my thinking was going of like, okay, well, what does this actually look like for me? When am I in that moment of just genius time? And it's such a fun thing to reflect on. And it can be challenging though.
It is challenging. And one of the, I think, the innovations that we've brought to the space, because, purpose, of course, is, at least in the Western tradition, purpose started with really Aristotle 2,300 years ago, who made the key distinction between different types of happiness. He said
Mm.
that humans are capable of pleasure, which he called eudaimonic happiness. I'm sorry, which he called hedonic happiness, related to the word hedonism. And
Yep.
he also said, but humans are also capable of experiencing the second type of happiness, which is living a life of virtue, living a life of intention. And he called that eudaimonic happiness, which in Greek means good spirit, right?
Oh,
And
cool.
and and so that's sort of where, from there, the Western tradition of purpose developed through, St. Augustine and Friedrich Nietzsche and Viktor Frankl and Abraham Maslow. And today it's being advanced very rapidly with positive psychology, right? Which is a
Yes.
movement to understand human thriving. So it's very, very exciting. But what's also really incredible is that when you look out around the world, you'll see that there are different traditions of purpose everywhere. So in Southern Africa,
Mm.
we have Ubuntu, right? Um, which is this idea of I am because we are. Um, in Japan, in Japanese culture, we have ikigai, right, which is this beautiful approach to purpose. In Costa Rica, which is one of the homes of the Blue Zones, they have this idea of plan de vida, right? But when you look at all these purpose traditions side by side, ours is definitely the most intellectual, by the way, but I mean the most like ideas driven, I would say. Um, but when we look at these traditions side by side, they really have so many things in common. They have more things in common that make them different. And it's from that really that I take my grounding in this work is by looking at all these global traditions and seeing what they have in common.
What would you say is like the strongest common thread that you see?
Yeah, the strongest common thread for sure is I think is best expressed by Ubuntu, which is this idea of I am because we are. So in other words, I exist through you and you exist through me, right? And it's really this idea of community. Um, and I think it's such an important message and push for, I'm not going to say American culture, I'm going to say specifically white American culture because America is a melting pot. We definitely have all those traditions from Africa are alive and well in our Black American culture. Traditions from Asia, traditions from Latin America, et cetera. So I'm really going to think about white American culture, but oftentimes in like um, commercialistic, capitalistic messages that we receive in white American culture. It's about, hey, if you're having a crisis of meaning, diet, exercise, go to a yoga retreat.
Go
It's all
inward.
about like me, right? And I think the biggest learning that I have made, which is which is silly to admit because it's so obvious, is that if you want to increase meaning in your life, it's not about you, it's about others. It's about joining a community,
Mm.
re-upping your commitment to a community, contributing, helping others. That's where I think the strongest path to purpose lies.
And if anyone's looking to read more about that, I think the book Bowling Alone is such a lovely
Mm,
starting point for that
yes.
concept of community and its impact on your health and well being. Today's episode of the podcast is brought to you by Toddle, your all in one teaching and learning platform for K through 12 schools, made for teachers and by teachers. If you're wondering about how to change the culture in your school and to get really centered on curriculum, Toddle might be worth a gander. So check us out at toddleapp.com. And now back to the episode with Ross. All right. So next, I'd love to talk with you, Ross, because I did your calling cards activity and I just had so much fun doing it. I was riveted. Like, I wasn't even listening to your directions. Like, there was a printed direction, and I was like solo at my table, just kind of doing it like a nerd. And I got so into it. So I would love to kind of pop my cards up there. Um, while I get that up, will you tell us a little bit about this activity and how it works and what you do?
Absolutely. Um, so calling cards is based on the work of Jonathan Holland, who is a behavioral psychologist, and um, he's developed this instrument that I think is very valid, used by universities today to help students navigate, choose careers. Calling cards was developed by Richard Leiter, who is the author of the book The Power of Purpose. He's my mentor. He's the one who has taught me everything I know about purpose. And Richard himself was a student of Viktor Frankl, so he actually studied with Viktor Frankl.
Cool.
Um, and essentially, what calling cards is it's this very playful activity where you go through a deck of cards and you make very quick decisions. And these cards have words like seeing possibilities or creating trust or um, seeing the big picture. And you look at these cards and you really quickly make three piles: a yes pile, a maybe pile, and a no pile. And the yes pile is like, yes, I love doing this. I can't remember learning it, and people say I do it well, right?
Mm.
So you just go really, really quickly. And we emphasize going quickly because I think so much of the problem with purpose work, and I think our innovation that we bring to this work is that you don't get to purpose by like thinking about it and reflecting on it and journaling on it. You get to purpose by feeling it and by like
Oh.
almost like turning off your thinking part of your brain and really dropping into things that are deeper. And
Mm.
so, this is why we emphasize the calling cards, which is a really quick, sort of intuitive thing. We also emphasize storytelling where people drop into that story time part of their brain. So yeah, so that's calling cards.
Nice. Yeah, I love to do value sorts. And so this is like another version of a value sort that
Yeah.
just really floats my boat. Okay, so I'm going to share my
And
screen.
just to finish off while you're pulling that up, once you make your three piles, you then focus on your yes pile and you get that pile down to five cards. Okay. So for instance, in my cards, seeing possibilities was number one, exploring the way is number two. So you can
Cool.
see how those cards directly led to this idea of I forge path, which is the beginning of my purpose statement. All right, so we're looking at your cards now. And I remember seeing these before. Um, and we also ask people to put their cards in an order. Like we say, hey, now once you have your five cards, I want you to think of like where do you start um, and where do you end, right? Like for me on a Saturday morning, I start by journaling, coming up with ideas, like just like letting my brain like drop into that resting state, attention mode, and just getting creative, right? And then I sort of get to work, right? So now in your cards are interesting because you start with this investigative card, putting the pieces together. And the investigative like category is all about, and I should say, there are six categories, right? Investigative is all about going deep, investigating, exploring ideas, etc. Um, and then you have all of these social cards, right? Bringing joy, creating trust, facilitating change. But I'm going to focus on those first two, bringing joy and creating trust, right? Because those those cards are about laughing and creating creating trust with someone, right? And so with the calling cards, typically you mainly use the calling cards to help put words to a person's gifts, right? Um, and then we use the storytelling to see how people use those gifts to have impact, right? Because that's really the two parts of a purpose statement. Like, I do this, this is my gift, so that this happens. This is my impact. It's like gifts plus impact. However, in your cards, what I see is gifts and the impact. So I'm seeing that um, putting the pieces together, bringing joy, creating trust, those are gifts. And my theory about you is that facilitating change and bringing out potential may be your impact, right? That may
Hmm.
be your impact. Um, so that's kind of like, if we were to go into now the golden thread storytelling activity where you're sharing stories from your groove and your growth map, I would be like thinking like a detective. You'd be dropping into story time, turning off your thinking brain. I would be listening to your stories, and I would sort of like I would just test my theory. How is she putting the pieces together, bringing joy, creating trust in order to bring out potential, facilitate change, right?
I love it. So it was just so fun to do this exercise. I'm going to stop sharing it now. Thanks for doing that, the unpacking of it. I think it's helpful to see that tool in action. And can you tell us the name of that card deck again if people want to purchase that for themselves?
Yeah, it's called calling cards. I could send you the link. Um, but if you Google, like it's on Amazon, calling cards, and then you Google Richard Leiter next to it, the cards will come up.
Very cool. Yeah, it was just one of those experiences, again, similar to a value sort that is just so clarifying and joy bringing. It's something I could see leaders doing with their teams at the start of the year to really understand their purpose,
Yeah.
or even classroom teachers doing with their students at the start of the year. I just think it's one of
Mhm.
those exercises that's a really easy lift that would have really meaningful and deep conversations. Have you seen it used in that way?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I've done calling cards with, at this point, probably 5,000 teachers at least. I do it every summer with heads of school that I work with, um, and then many, 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 many kids. Even today, one of my colleagues is working with a school doing this activity, and
Yay.
it's powerful. It's powerful because it helps. This idea of there's this like very there's this very old confusion between purpose and passions, right? So,
Mm,
passions are those things you love doing, et cetera, et cetera. But purpose is actually something like it's like a level deeper. It's like purpose is like this really abstract thread of like, in my case, I forge paths so that goodness prevails. And it connects all the different periods, chapters, jobs, and passions of my life, but it's actually deeper than that, right?
mm,
Like I forge paths so goodness prevails as a parent, as a social entrepreneur, as I'm also a volunteer firefighter, and just sort of like with my friends, with in all areas of my life. And so, what's challenging about this work is that it's very, very abstract. And
right.
so, when we're doing this work with middle schoolers and high schoolers, um, it just helps us. It helps us help them put words to things that are very abstract. It's about making abstract things visible and
Right.
tangible through words, right?
I thought what was so powerful is you talked about doing this activity with your children, and just
Yeah.
could you tell the story about your son and how that all kind of went down?
Absolutely. I've got two kids. My daughter just graduated this past weekend, and my son graduated the year before, and he's in college now. Um, but what I noticed about both my kids went to school in the pandemic, went up, either late middle school or high school during the pandemic, and it was pretty brutal. Parts of them got completely covered over in dust. They became disconnected, like children everywhere. Um, but because I had known them, of course, all of their lives, even though they were sort of diminished, I would say, during the pandemic, I still knew the magic of them, and I still
Mhm.
sort of sensed that golden thread. And I used this instrument to, well, throughout their lives, but especially in high school, to help them put words to things that were unique and magical and wondrous about them. Because I believe we are all unique and magical and wondrous. And sometimes we just have a hard time seeing it, or sometimes the system's demands are so extreme that we become disconnected from that. And so,
Right.
my son's case, for instance, he went to a large public high school, and he was online for a full year of school, and he was really struggling, and
Yeah.
we did this activity, and he pulled these calling cards around like moving physically, building things, solving problems, right? And they were like very like concrete. They were the realistic quadrant, which is all about concrete. They were the investigative quadrant, et cetera. And so his purpose statement was, I build things to solve monumental problems.
So cool.
And when I saw that, I was like, Sebastian, hey, why don't we, why don't we leave the public school for now? I mean, it's great. Worked well. It worked perfect for my daughter who graduated from that public school. But why don't we leave the public school? Why don't we go to this other school where you can do woodworking and art and jewelry making? And that's what we did. And
Cool.
he ended up at that other school, that second school, developing a beautiful portfolio of work that became the basis for his college admissions process. So for both my children, I use this activity to help them really see who they were, move deeper into that direction, and then present like a clear story about themselves. Because in the college admissions process, for instance, that's what they want. They are asking the exact same questions that we ask in our groove and growth storytelling activity, right? They're
Right.
asking questions like, one of the questions on the Common App is, some children have a background that is so meaningful, their application would be incomplete without it. If this applies to you, what's your story? Right? I mean,
Cool.
that is like such a challenging question. They're asking you to sum up in 250 words or whatever it is, what's your story, right? And another question is, some students have overcome a challenge or a setback, um, and grown from it. Tell us about that, right? That's called like the so-called trauma question on the Common App. But again, that's the growth story, right? And so, when children have a purpose statement and they've developed stories around that statement, they're able to engage in this work at a really deep level. And when the readers read these essays, they're like, oh, I see this kid. This kid makes sense. He's got this like clear story. I see it reflected in the activities. His GPA is good. Let's admit him, right? And I think
Right.
that really is how the college admissions process work. These people, these offices, the college admissions officers, they're looking for kids with purpose. They're looking for kids with a clear
Right.
story because they know that purpose-driven kids, they're not only going to learn deeper because they're more likely to connect their thinking with their emotion, um, but they're also going to be able to manage stress better because the thing that we know about purpose-driven kids is that they're more likely to experience a challenge as sometimes invigorating rather
Mm,
than only debilitating, right? And so they tend to have lower levels of anxiety than kids who are, for instance, goal-driven.
so cool. I can't help but see this on both an individual student level and on a systems level. Like what you said there was, we found this, my son wanted to make and create things to have an impact. So then we looked for a school that had those same matching values, and we found the school that did that. And I think now more than ever, any school leader listening needs to know, like, what is your value proposition? What is your purpose? And how does that connect with
Yeah,
your learners? Like, are you just we're churning out college prep ready kids, and if you're not going to come and fit in our mold, you don't belong here? Are you centered on this experiential hands-on learning,
yeah.
arts driven education? I think that marriage between a kid knowing their purpose and then finding the place that also mirrors that purpose is just such a lovely way to see this exercise from both
Yeah,
sides.
that's right. And that's actually a huge part of my work with schools is just as individuals have purpose statements that fit them like a comfortable jacket, right?
Mm,
Schools should have mission statements that really capture
the
that
niche.
that secret sauce, that thing that they are really, really excellent at. So I'll give you two examples. Rivers School in Boston. Um, this is a K-12 that has had this really remarkable, I would say, turnaround in the last 10 years. And the reason they've had this turnaround is that they came up with this mission statement that really fit who they were and encapsulated like what makes them amazing. And they're kind of like the way that I think of them is their statement is like, we're about excellence with humanity, right? So they are
Right.
like unabashedly an academic school, a school because they're competing against in the Boston area all of these schools that are ultra, I mean, some of the most academic schools, honestly, in the United States, right? So they're like, we're an academic school, and we're about academic excellence, but we do this by helping each child step into their humanity and by
Love
creating a
it.
community of humans that support that child, right? So excellence with humanity. Now, let's come to Denver, close to where I live. I live in Boulder, Colorado, but in Denver, we work with the school Montessori Academy of Colorado, and one of the things I love about it's a Montessori K-8 school. One of the things I love about the school is their kind of idea is like we want to make you a fearless forward learner, right? So
Cool.
like it's totally different, right? You're not going to get like the academic intensity that you would at the river school, but you're going to have a chance to really dive into who you are and then bring that to this like very special urban environment in which this school operates. I mean, they're really a city, they're really an urban school. So kids are going
Cool.
out and they're just like making change and collaborating and working. So two very different mission statements for two very different types of children.
Right. And how beautiful is if if the student and the family and the school are all speaking the same language about what success looks like,
Yeah.
then you're not getting into these quabbles about how we're being graded or their performance on a standardized test, because we know, okay, maybe that is the focus for some schools and maybe it's not for other schools. Getting clear on
Yeah.
what success looks like.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I think the greatest danger to schools is when they try to be all things to all people, right? When
Yes.
they try to just do it all. And most schools, most independent schools, except for a very lucky few that have long wait lists, but many private schools, the majority for sure, are experiencing enrollment struggles now. And so it's more important now than ever that schools, just as it's just as important for a student or a teacher or a leader to fully step into their humanity and bring their full humanity to school every day. it's very important that schools step into their full like mission, their full like
Mm.
really step into like who they are, and not be this like diffuse all things to all people, because that's not going to work in the future.
I think that touches on a sensitive point, though, that I think a lot of people and a lot of school leaders right now are feeling a sense of fear, or feeling a sense of uncertainty. So I wonder, what advice do you have for staying the course and not being driven by that fear?
Yeah, I see this a lot. I mean, every summer, I take groups of school leaders on um, the Salmon River, which is a wilderness river in Idaho. We raft a 88-mile section of the river called the River of No Return, and it's 5 days on the river with no cell phones. And it's an incredible experience for me and for the leaders that come on the journey. We go as deep as we can. I would say the leaders come to the program very tight, very sort of oftentimes sort of anxious and
Mm.
superficial. Not there's sort of their interactions are superficial, I would say, for the most part. They appear relaxed because they're really good at always appearing relaxed, always appearing at ease. But what I can tell you is by the second or third day, these school leaders who are sometimes managing schools with up to 2,000 students, budgets of up to 40, $50 million a year, um, they become like children again, and they become
Oh,
open and vulnerable and human. And we spend time on the river each morning, engaged in storytelling, engaged in sharing, engaged in small group conversation. And, um, it's a very structured learning flow, but it's all about helping leaders just like connect with their humanity. We do the purpose work. So everyone comes up with a purpose statement and they make a purpose map. Um, and, in the morning after coffee, as the sun is sort of like, sort of coming over sideways through the pine trees and the river, it's very common for me to see people with tears and, just going through all the stages of emotion as they recount what their year has been like. Leading a school is a magical job, unlike any other, but it comes with its unique challenges, right? And so all that comes out on the river. And so we use the 5 days on the river then, once we come off to that deep community and connection that we built. We use that then to sustain us during the school year in a series of online conversations that
mm,
we call Circle of Trust. This is from the work of Parker Palmer, and a few leaders each meeting bring a challenge, a dilemma, and we form a circle of like four people around them in a breakout room. And the leader describes their dilemma, and the other leaders that are helping them ask questions. There's no problem solving, there's no advice giving. The whole point is to help that leader find their best inner solution to a problem. And what's interesting about this activity is that the leaders who are just helping, who are asking the questions, they oftentimes will resolve their own dilemmas just in the
terrific.
process of experiencing another leader doing that. And so it's a very, very powerful work. And the reason I describe this program is that to me it's as Joanna Macy says, this is the work that reconnects. It's the work
Mm.
that helps leaders reconnect with like why they got into oftentimes teaching or working in schools in the first place. It helps them reconnect to the joy of their job, to helps them reconnect to feeling connected, feeling in full community with other people, because the head of school job is one of its
Lonely.
unique challenges is it's almost always isolated. You're the only person that has that job. You can't even be fully transparent often with your board of trustees. And so it's just a hard job. It's a hard job. And this program really helps leaders reconnect.
I think what I'm hearing is that as leaders, there is a piece that you have to wear a mask. Like you've got to be strong. You've got to have kind of things figured out. You got to not be in a panic. You've got to be likable. You've got to not be angry. And that's exhausting. So having a place where you can have like true community and vulnerability, whether that's through a program like yours or something you curate yourself, but somewhere where you can just let that mask down and be vulnerable is just a
Yeah,
really helpful way to keep in touch with purpose.
I think so. And the idea of a mask, um, I don't really like. I mean, I understand what you're saying there, and it's definitely true for a lot of a lot of school leaders. The term that I like to use to describe what you're talking about is this idea of controlled vulnerability. And
Mm,
so when you think about being a leader, or actually being human, period, um, we have our essence, right? The we have this like secret sauce of who we are, right? And this is the calling cards, right? Really helps us put words to that like essence. But then we have our form. And our form is like how we actually show up in the world to others, right?
mm,
And great leaders, and I would say great teachers, great humans, um, work to get a tight fit between essence and form. So they show up authentically. They show up. They're people. They're like transparent, right? And we've all worked
mm.
for people like this, or we've all had teachers like this, where there's no mystery, there's no opaqueness. Like Mrs. Johnson comes in the room, we're like, oh, there's Mrs. Johnson. I know who she is. I know what she's going to do. Like she's very stable and consistent, right? Now, Mrs. Johnson probably has some things about her life that are really painful and difficult to talk about. And it's not that she's putting a mask over all those things. It's that she's choosing to bring certain stories. She's choosing to bring
Right.
certain parts of herself, right? And that are coherent with who she is, right? So being vulnerable is not about being authentic, is not about laying all the dirty laundry out on the floor, right? It's about bringing those stories, those parts of us that we feel comfortable sharing, right? And that's not to say that we may have experienced a trauma that's unresolved, or we may be going through a divorce that's just like gnawing at us, or we may be having financial difficulties. All those things may be happening. But I would say the great leaders are those who are able to, even in uncertainty and challenge, they're still able to remain open, right? As
Mm,
opposed to just like, as Brene Brown says in one of her famous 60-minute videos, like armoring up, right? Like putting on this like shell. Because when we put on a shell, we lose the vulnerability, we lose the trust, we lose the authenticity, we lose our power, right? To
mm.
teach, to lead.
Beautiful. One final question for you, my friend. I think a lot of people listening to this might feel a sense of almost like, I don't know. I don't know what my purpose is. I don't know what my purpose statement is. I can't say it in one sentence. So, if anybody's in that position where they're just maybe feeling a little bit stuck or they're curious, where would you suggest that they turn to?
Yeah. Um, oh, I mean, I'd love you just to come to one of our workshops and work with us. It's hard to replicate this activity by yourself.
Mm,
Um, almost need like a group, a container, um, to do it. I think the calling cards is a great place to start. I think you could do the calling cards, and I think you could find your 5 cards and you could put them in an order, just like we described. And then I think the next best thing would be to take a picture of those cards, as Cindy has, and then go to a coffee shop with like your best friend, um, and just exchange stories with that person, and talk about those moments of your life where you felt just like, yes, this is me, and those other moments of your life where you struggled, right? And ask that person to describe the patterns that he or she sees in you. Because when we drop into story time, we need someone who is listening and sensing our emotions and helping us see the patterns in our stories. And I think that is the beginning of a great of a potential great discovery process, right? I believe that most people have a deep sense of purpose,
right.
um, or there's at least parts of their lives that are very purposeful. And by sort of excavating and telling stories about those parts of our lives, we can see things more clearly, and then we can move more strongly into our purpose, right?
Mm,
Um, I think, Cindy, the last thing I'd love to say, if it's okay, is that in my view, purpose is a both and. In other words, we all we all live in systems. We all have jobs, or we have things that we need to do. Like if you're a parent, you have to raise children and get them to the doctors. And if you're a teacher, you have to put together lesson plans and grade and do all these things. So we always live in these systems that are like making demands on us, right? But within the demands of the system, we also need to connect to ourselves and find a path that feels meaningful, right?
Right.
And so when we become more aware of this path of meaning that brings us alive, we can negotiate with the system. And
Mm.
over time, we can make those two things line up. Like Cindy, you've got a very unique career and job, and you have like, by knowing who you were, you've negotiated to that, right? And that's what we help young people do, is to negotiate to that place where what the system is asking them is the same thing that they feel called to do. And when those two things match up, that's when the magic and the joy and the performance happens in life and work.
Beautiful. It's that flow. It's finding that sense of alignment
Yes,
that you're not dreading going to work every day, right? That it's
exactly.
you feel in your I don't know, I feel joyous every single day and in every different avenue of life. And I think if every leader felt that way, if every person felt that way, the world would be a better place.
Agreed.
Love it. Well, thank you so, so much for coming on today. It was such a lovely conversation with you.
Thank you, Cindy. I really enjoyed this opportunity.